Hello, I'm Jonasz Rawiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express, and as always, I hope you enjoy the journey. Tonight, the focus is on Ukraine's energy system and the growing pressure it is facing. Russian missile and drone attacks have intensified in recent days, targeting power stations, substations and gas facilities across the country. With temperatures well below freezing, those strikes are forcing emergency power cuts and stretching the electricity grid close to its limits. The impact is being felt far beyond industry, in hospitals, maternity wards and other essential services, now relying on backup power. To examine the latest attacks, the strain on Ukraine's energy infrastructure and what it means for civilians as winter deepens, let's take a look at this next report.
Power shortages in Kyiv's hospitals this week offer a clear illustration of the scale and intent behind Russia's massive strikes against Ukraine's energy sector. Following a mass Russian missile and drone strike overnight on February 7th, Ukraine's energy network remains under severe strain, with emergency outages continuing across most regions. In Kyiv, residents have received as little as 1.5 to 2 hours of electricity per day for several consecutive days. Hospitals have been forced to rely on backup generators, ration power use, and postpone non-urgent procedures. Ukrenergo, Ukraine's state grid operator, said on February 8 that the level of damage to transmission and distribution networks makes it impossible to fix emergency outages in most regions. The February 7th strike damaged energy infrastructure linked to nuclear power and came ahead of another cold snap, with temperatures in Kyiv expected to fall as low as -19 degrees Celsius. Restoration crews are working at power plants and high-voltage substations, but Ukrenergo warned that the system remains fragile after 2 large-scale attacks earlier this week. Since January 2026 alone, Russian forces have carried out at least 217 strikes against Ukraine's energy systems. These attacks are part of a larger campaign. By mid-2024, Ukraine's available power generation capacity had dropped by an estimated 85% due to systematic Russian strikes. By late 2024, nearly all thermal and hydroelectric power plants had been destroyed.
And now, let's zoom in on the explaining portion of our show. Since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022, winter months have followed a pattern set by Moscow's targeting strategy. Beyond military positions, Russian forces have repeatedly focused on Ukraine's energy and heating infrastructure during the coldest months of the year, when civilian dependence on electricity is at its highest. As always, here is a closer look.
Each winter, large-scale missile and drone attacks have targeted power plants, high-voltage substations, and transmission networks. Thermal and hydroelectric facilities have been particularly vulnerable, with Russia's persistent attacks against them. Moscow has also repeatedly targeted power lines that supply critically needed backup power to Ukraine's nuclear power plants. These attacks have forced partial disconnections and reduced available capacity, limiting the system's ability to compensate for losses elsewhere. Gas infrastructure has also been a recurring target. Facilities operated by Naftogaz have been attacked dozens of times, disrupting production and storage and increasing pressure on the energy system during peak demand. The effects extend beyond electricity. Energy strikes have cascading consequences for heating systems, water supply, hospitals, and public transport. Ukrainian officials say that the winter campaign is designed to weaponize cold weather and civilian vulnerability, increasing pressure on the population while diplomatic efforts continue to drag. Rather than random or purely tactical strikes, winter targeting has become a predictable feature of Russia's broader strategy against Ukraine's civilian infrastructure.
And now, as always, it's time to take a look at the issue in greater detail. Across Ukraine, the war on the ground is being matched by a quieter but devastating campaign in disguise, a sustained assault on the country's energy system. Russian forces have stepped up attacks on power stations, substations and gas infrastructure, pushing Ukraine's electricity grid close to the breaking point. One of the latest strikes hit a key Naftogaz facility in Poltava region, part of a wider wave of missile and drone strikes aimed squarely at energy production and transmission. Now, the timing is critical. With winter temperatures well below freezing, even short power cuts can have serious consequences. Ukraine's grid operator has been forced to introduce emergency outages across large parts of the country, warning that the system is operating at the edge of its capacity. Nowhere is the impact more acute than in hospitals. In Kiev, medical facilities have been relying on backup generators to keep intensive care units, operating theaters, and life support equipment running. Doctors describe working under constant uncertainty, knowing that electricity, essential for everything from heating to ventilators, could fail at any moment. Human rights groups say this is not an unintended side effect of the war, but a deliberate strategy. Repeated strikes on energy infrastructure that supports civilian life, leaving health services dangerously exposed, are frequent and systematic. The risks were highlighted once again last week in southern Ukraine, where a Russian drone strike damaged a maternity hospital in Zaporizhia, injuring staff and patients. As Ukraine scrambles to repair damaged systems and import emergency power from neighboring countries, officials warn that the weeks ahead will be among the hardest yet. In this conflict, electricity has become a weapon, and its absence a threat to survival itself. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Arturas Żarnowski's program head, a Co-Create Future of Ukraine. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello.
So we have mentioned the question of attacks against healthcare facilities in the introduction. So let's start with that. Can you tell us more about the statistics? Because the latest attack on the maternity hospital in Zaporizhia is not an exception. It's a part of a long-standing pattern of Russian attacks.
Unfortunately, yes. And for the social infrastructure, I mean, hospitals, schools, kindergartens systematically attacked. For instance, schools, every seventh school in Ukraine was attacked. With the hospital, I do not have exact statistics, but we see almost every day and every night that it is a target also. And yeah, unfortunately, it is the reality.
The Kiev Independent, I think, reported that there have been over 2,000 instances of such attacks, including 300 facilities that were destroyed completely, which I'm assuming is, beyond repair, essentially. Why is Russia doing this? I mean, it may appear to be asking about the obvious, but let's just, essentially get things straight when it comes to Russia's strategy in this war.
I think it is both. If we would read the definition of genocide, so it is exactly literally what is happening to create conditions where it is impossible to live. So it is one aspect, and another aspect, I think it is to create pressure for the civil society, for the population itself, I don't know, just to show that it is impossible to continue, and because they are not having a lot of wins in the battlefield, then they are trying to attack population itself.
So you've mentioned genocide, and there have also been powerful arguments concerning what Russia is doing, labeling it as crimes against humanity. In fact, I believe one of the officers at the United Nations responsible for the protection of human rights specifically stated that crimes against humanity have been committed by Russia. They didn't talk about healthcare facilities. They were mostly talking about the situation in frontline cities where so-called drone safaris are taking place, but still they've established that this is what Russia is doing. Why do you think the media and political leaders are kind of downplaying the issue? They're not really often saying words like genocide, crimes against humanity. Instead, they are trying to take a rather subdued position on that, despite the available evidence.
Yeah, unfortunately it happens, but yeah, look, remember in 2022 when there were first attacks to the civil infrastructure, including the energy sector, it was like a shock in the world, in the media, in political discussions, but somehow, unfortunately, it it becomes normal. I mean, each day it's happening the same thing. Even the scale is bigger. Energy infrastructure, what is happening in Kiev and other cities, and unfortunately, people get used to it. I don't want to say those words, but I mean the level of normalization is rising, and yeah, for media and for everyone, I think it would be good to remind each time what is happening in reality, despite that, you know, people are tired, but still the war is ongoing with the brutal attacks. And yeah, after more than 1 week, it will be 4 complete years after full invasion, and each day it's happening the same.
And we're getting closer to a humanitarian catastrophe as a result of what Russia is doing. Let's talk about what's happening on the ground. Starting with healthcare facilities, what are the biggest challenges for the functioning of hospitals in Ukraine today?
I think that energy, electricity, heating, I mean the basic things are the biggest challenge, but of course there are much more challenges. First of all, a lot of patients after attacks, rehabilitation of wounded soldiers in the hospitals, overcrowded with patients, and lack of staff. So I think it is very complex, but for today, I think the biggest challenge is just to ensure the basic needs in those hospitals. I mean, heating, electricity, that at least to function. But of course, it is much wider because of the scope what hospitals are challenging.
What is Ukraine doing to make these facilities more resilient? We often see situations whereby, for example, schools are being relocated or are relocating their activities to underground facilities so that the risk of injury from drone attacks, from debris is minimized. But with hospitals, it's more difficult, right? Because the infrastructure that you need is much more sophisticated. Nevertheless, do you think that, for example, European countries could help Ukraine accomplish this task at this stage?
Yes, for instance, Civil Protection and Shelters Coalition is also trying to solve this problem. I mean, for the hospitals, you are absolutely right. It is more difficult and more expensive to install shelters or underground facilities for some type of services, but it is ongoing. I mean, of course, there is a lack of resources, fundings, and time is needed. But yes, schools with underground schools, with underground shelters, with dual usage, where it can be more safe for the lessons, and the same goes to hospitals. It needs to be done. It is ongoing, but it should be much wider. To ensure those safety conditions for the staff and for the patients.
So now, the crucial question is, can Ukraine survive this winter? I'm not just talking about the healthcare system now, about infrastructure in general. We're looking at Kiev, where living conditions are deteriorating as a result of Russian war crimes. What would it take to ensure that Ukraine can make it through it? We've already seen fundraisers in countries like Poland, the Czech Republic, hundreds of generators being sent to Kiev and other cities. But is that enough?
It's not enough, of course, but in the same time, they will survive. And of course, the price is very big, but there is no other choice. And yes, now it is important to balance. I mean, humanitarian support, you mentioned hundreds or even thousands of generators, heating solutions. But in the same time, to invest in the long-term investments to restore the electricity, because, you know, for some solutions, it will take time, and you need even to start preparing for another winter. because we see that it is a weapon. Winter becomes a weapon, and to invest more into the resilience, in balancing with the rapid response, but also with the long-term investment to the social infrastructure, which makes possible, it makes solutions for the long-term resilience.
Do you think there is still a tipping point beyond which it will be untenable not to do more, not to intervene? We're already seeing a city of millions being pushed to the brink by these attacks. And now there have been, historically, conflicts at a lesser scale where the concept of humanitarian intervention was applied. Of course, the circumstances were rather different. Do you think that the only argument that prevents this is that, oh, Russia has nuclear weapons, we cannot do anything because that would mean World War III? This argument keeps appearing. But honestly, is it enough just to look the other way when so many people are suffering and when a country is moving to the brink of a humanitarian crisis at a massive scale?
I mean, there is, it is difficult questions, but now Ukraine have to fight not only in the battlefield, but also in diplomatical world, in political world. Also, all citizens now are suffering. So,
do you think closing the sky could be on the table again? This was something the Ukrainians were asking for from the beginning of the war. Close the sky, help us defend against aerial attacks. Do you think that perhaps this argument could return?
I hope it should be discussed again because we see what is happening, and Ukraine usually says that the air defense should be a priority, and it is lack of equipment, lack of ammunition, just to keep population at least safe. But after, I think, July or June, when those attacks started in much bigger scale, of course the air defense should be a priority, and somehow to minimize those attacks or those damages what was created. But of course, comprehensive support for the Ukraine now, it is more than ever, I would say, not only in the military field, but microfinancial, humanitarian, restoring and rebuilding, and rapid response recovery. So I mean, the situation is now, I understand that from 2022 there was ups and downs, but now situation is really bad, and strong and quick decisions are very needed.
Arturas Żarnowskis was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you.
And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a curated selection of all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. Ukraine is moving to internationalize its fast-growing defense industry. Kiev announced plans on the 8th of February to open 10 weapons export centers across Europe in 2026, while expanding overseas production of Ukrainian drone technology.
President Zelensky said on February 8th that the export hubs will be established in several locations across Europe, including the Baltics and Northern Europe. The centers are intended to support the controlled export of Ukrainian military technologies, a policy Kyiv has been developing as domestic production of certain weapons outpaces available financing. Zelensky also confirmed that Ukrainian drone production will begin in Germany as early as mid-February. He added that similar Ukrainian-run drone production lines are already active in the United Kingdom.
Ukraine has denied any involvement in the assassination attempt on Russian General Vladimir Alexeyev, the first deputy head of Russia's military intelligence agency. This comes as Russia's Federal Security Service, the FSB, alleges Ukrainian involvement in a shooting at the general's Moscow apartment block.
In comments published by Reuters on February 8th, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha said Kyiv has no knowledge of the incident, suggesting it could stem from internal dynamics within Russia. The FSB claimed that Alexeyev was targeted on Ukrainian orders and said a suspect had been arrested in Dubai and extradited to Moscow. Russian authorities have also named 2 alleged accomplices, though details remain unverified and based solely on FSB statements. No independent confirmation has been provided.
President Volodymyr Zelensky signed 2 decrees on the 8th of February imposing sanctions on individuals and companies involved in supplying components for Russian missiles and drones. The measures followed a large overnight Russian air attack on the 7th of February, when more than 400 drones and around 40 missiles were launched against Ukraine.
The first decree targets Russia's military-industrial supply chain, sanctioning 24 individuals and 27 companies that provide materials and components used in missiles and drone production. Zelensky said the weapons used in recent strikes would be impossible to produce without foreign components obtained in violation of sanctions. Those targeted include entities and individuals linked to Russia, Hong Kong, and China. The second decree focuses on Russia's financial and sanctions-evading infrastructure. It applies to 42 individuals and 35 legal entities, including payment operators, cryptocurrency holders, exchanges, and organizations supporting Russia's crypto market.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates. I'm Jonasz Rawiński. Bye for now.